All right, all right, all right. Welcome all. Welcome to another exciting edition of Climate Science on Tap. All right, that was sort of lukewarm. Let's try that again. Are you guys ready for some Climate Science on Tap? That was much better. That was much, much better. All right, y'all. So, tonight's edition of Climate Science on Tap is a really great one. It's on the road to cleaner transportation. How many of you guys in this audience, raise your hand if you know what percentage transportation plays, or what percentage of our carbon emissions is accounted for in transportation? Is it 25%? Is it 30%? Is it 40%? Is it almost 50%? Yeah, there you go. All right, yeah, so we have some great speakers today, and they're going to talk about the role that transportation plays in carbon emissions, and also what can be done about it in terms of the clean fuel standard. So we got a great panel tonight. We've got climate scientist Dr. Heather Price in the house. All right. We've got Senior Policy Manager Kelly Hall in the house. You guys, if you really want them to come up front, you're going to have to yell a little louder. And last but not least, climate change and clean energy organizer Ben Zaleski's in the house. That was pretty good. We also have a great group of organizations here that are tabling. You guys probably know this already, but Climate Science on Tap is being put on by Cascadia Climate Action. Cascadia Climate Action is all about climate action. We're going to ask all of you to take part in some action tonight. We've got some great groups all around this room that are here to talk about ways that you can get involved in climate action. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you who's in the room. I'm going to ask our groups to give a shout for themselves when I call your name. We've got Audubon, Washington in the house. All right, they're over there. We've got Bikeworks. Bikeworks is here. We've got the Citizens Climate Lobby. Where are you? Okay, over there. We've got Climate Solutions. Where's Climate Solutions? Kind of split. They're everywhere. We got Feet First over there. And we've got the Mass Coalition, and I think the Seattle Subway group is our primary group over here. That's the Mass Coalition. We also have Seattle Electric Vehicle Association over there. Great. Washington Environmental Council. All right. I like that energy. We got Western Washington Clean Cities Coalition. Yay. They've got cool coasters. Check out their coasters. And of course, Cascadia Climate Action, your sponsor tonight. And they are over there in the corner. Make sure you go and see them before you leave. All right. So as I said, the topic for tonight is transportation. Without further ado, I'm going to bring up our first speaker. Dr. Heather Price is an atmospheric chemist, climate scientist, climate justice activist, and an educator in Seattle. She earned her PhD in chemistry from the University of Washington, studying the long-range transport and photochemistry of air pollution from East Asia to the U.S. West Coast. She conducted her postdoctoral research with UW's program on climate change, where she collaborated with a group at Harvard to incorporate the isotopes of hydrogen and deuterium into the global chemical transport model of the atmosphere. Dr. Price also attended the climate negotiations COP6 at The Hague, Netherlands, and has designed numerous classes and workshops on climate change and climate justice, teaching these at the University of Washington, Highline College, Green River College. I went to Green River College, by the way. Yeah. And Seattle colleges. Dr. Price is currently a tenured chemistry faculty at North Seattle College. Let's give it up for Dr. Heather Price.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Sean. So let me just go to my slides. Let's start with this one. So this dress that I'm wearing is climate data, showing the temperature change since 1850. Where my knee is was 2018. And also one of my tweets, I like to tweet if you want to go on Twitter, and I posted about my life in carbon dioxide. When I was born, it was 326 parts per million. And last year, when I posted this, it was 415. On February 10th, the new limit that we've reached is 416, so it's still going up. So take that climate data in my dress, and if we put it out on a graph, it looks like this. And what really strikes me about this, I don't know if it's showing the color, but 1976, that is the only year in my life when I was a toddler where the temperatures were colder than the 20th century average. That's the only cold year in my whole life. And that means for my children and for my students, they've never lived on Earth at a time that is colder than average. You've known hot. And if we go back in time even further, we can see glacial and interglacial. So you can see 1950 level over there. That's when my parents were born. And then where we are as of February 10th, 416 parts per million. And this is ice ages going back almost a million years. All through those ice ages, all of human history, we've never been over about 300 parts per million of carbon dioxide, and now we're at 416. So the other thing to keep in mind is half of the rise, half of the emissions, right? We're going to talk about emissions from transportation today, but emissions are coming from transportation, from power, from lots of different sources. Half of those emissions are since I graduated high school, and the other half are since pre-industrial. 20% were emitted since my child, who is 12 years old now. 20% just in, or more than 20% in his lifetime. So let's keep going. So that means when, you know, people know this is now an issue, you're here because you want to know what to do about it. And this is the carbon budget that the IPCC report in 2018 came out and said, hey, if we want to limit our temperature rise to 1.5 Celsius, which is about, compared to 2 degrees Celsius, right now we're at 1.1 degrees Celsius rise. We're already at a 2 degrees Fahrenheit rise. That budget right there, if we want to meet that, we have to leave half of the known reserves of coal, oil, and gas in the ground. And these are the known reserves. This is not including the fossil fuels that Exxon and BP and these different companies are still exploring for. This is what they already know about. These are their known reserves, what's on the books. So as a world, if we want to meet the carbon budget that the Paris Accords are telling us we should meet, what the science is saying, we have to leave half of it in the ground. Those are stranded assets. So this is a really big issue. And then the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius doesn't sound like much, right? There's more similar difference if you just walk outside. But in terms of ecosystems, if you just think about coral reefs, at 1.5 degrees Celsius rise, another 0.4 from where we are today, we will see a decline of coral reefs of 70 to 90%. That means at best we save 30% if we can stop at 1.5. At worst, we save 10%. We go to 2 degrees rise, that number goes to 99% decline for coral reefs. And that has implications for economies, for all sorts of things. Let me keep going. So we're here to talk about transportation. Transportation in Washington State is 44.6% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Compared to electricity, 16.7, heating, residential, 23.7, and 15 for agriculture. So transportation is our #1 emitter. And then let's break up what that transportation, what is that 44% made up of? Well, 69% of that green area is cars and trucks on our roads. And then another part that we often overlook is air travel. Us flying here in Washington State, that's 21% of our emissions. Compared to, if you compare that to the rest of the US, it's 9%. That means we fly twice as much, more than twice as much as the rest of our fellow Americans around the US. We fly a lot. Oh, this one didn't come out that well, but it's the same thing. So this is just showing how much of our energy. So 19% is diesel. Let me just stay on this one. The PDF didn't keep it. So Of those cars and trucks, that 69%, 19% of that is diesel, and 50% of that is from gasoline cars. And what's not taken into account in this is air pollution. These are just carbon emissions, right? So there's two different pieces here. There's the carbon emissions that cause climate change, but there's also the air quality issues around transportation. And I'll get to that too. So I'm going to skip that one. Carbon intensity of fossil fuels. If somebody wants to ask me about this later, I have things to say about natural gas. I don't trust that number. This is from 2016. Since then, we know natural gas leaks. We know that the principal component of natural gas is methane. Methane is 86 times stronger as a greenhouse gas over a 20-year period. And if it reaches a certain threshold of leaking, which the data is showing we're probably over that, it's as bad as coal in terms of climate. That's different than air quality, right? When you burn it, it burns cleaner. But in terms of climate, it is likely as bad. And then we get into emissions. This is all oil emissions from extracting and refining oil. So this is carbon emissions just from the extraction and refining, not even including the burning of it. And there's a big difference. Over on the right is Norway. Way over here is China, California, parts of Canada. But the take home for me on this is we're all on the same boat. And if we're all in a canoe and half the canoe's underwater, but my end's dry, right? Norway's dry, but the rest is wet, that's not really going to help us much. The canoe is going down, right? The whole point of this is we need to leave half of these in the ground. Which half? Who gets to choose what's left of that budget and how to distribute that budget? That's why for me as a scientist, I've now realized climate it's no longer a matter of looking at the data and at the science, right? And when you go to the doctor, you look at the test results, but once you know what the test results are, you move on and you deal with how did you do treatment. We need to move on and start dealing with treatment. How do we get to zero carbon worldwide by 2050? That's the big question, right? And that's not a question that science can really answer. That's for us all to answer. Again, here's emissions from biofuels versus fossil fuels. So the green and yellow are different biofuels and their carbon emissions that can come from that. And you can see that sugarcane is about 1/3 of the carbon emissions when you burn it compared to, at the bottom here, this one's diesel and this one's gasoline. What's missing from this picture is air pollution. Anytime you burn a carbon-based fuel, you are producing air pollution. And so that's what I want to spend time on this. If you burn carbon, whether it's in the form of sugar from a sugar cane where the carbon emissions might be lower, you're still producing air pollution in the form of ozone, particulate matter, which I'll get into, and nitrogen oxides, either nitrogen monoxide and also nitrogen dioxide. When you burn carbon, you get all of these things, and these hurt people. The Puget Sound Air Agency said that diesel exhaust is responsible for 78% of potential cancer risk from all air toxins in the Puget Sound area. So diesel exhaust is the number one. And the reason is these particulate matter. So do you see over on the right, it says particulate matter PM2.5 and PM210. This is the diameter of a human hair. It's about 70 micrometers. And then there's a cross section over on the right. The little yellow blob on the left is PM10. That means 10 micrometers across. You could see it with the naked eye if you've got 20/20 vision. That's kind of pollen or a really tiny piece of dust. When you breathe that in, you can cough it up, you can blow it out with your nose. But the other one, the PM2.5, the 2.5 micrometer and smaller, those are so small that they can reach deep into the alveoli of your lung where the transition between oxygen happens into your bloodstream. And those are so small, the smaller ones can go into your bloodstream. And this is why this is so dangerous for people's cardiovascular and for asthma, emphysema, COPD, right? These are health impacts. and even biofuels emit these. And my colleague, a cardiologist, Dr. Mark Vossler, just sent me this today. The American Lung Association recently ranked air pollution in the Seattle-Tacoma metropolitan region as being the 9th worst in the nation because of our diesel and also because of the smoke that we get in the wintertime and also the increasing amount of smoke that we're getting in the summer that is exacerbated by climate change. So we'll leave that up there. There are automobiles that do not emit on-road emissions of air pollution, and these are electric vehicles. If you're driving an electric vehicle, there are no ozone being formed, there's no nitrogen oxides being formed, and there's no particulate pollution coming out of those cars. There might be road dust, but there's not emissions coming out of a tailpipe because there is no tailpipe. Anyone see the Super Bowl? That half of the cars that were advertised in the Super Bowl were electric this year. Half. King County, we have, let's see, Washington State total, we've got about 42,000 electric cars on the road. More than half of those are in King County. And we're only 30% of Washington's population. We've got a lot of electric cars on the road. We need more, where we need to replace the ones that we've got. And people often ask, well, what about the comparison, gosh, these slides are really hard to see, between a gasoline car and an electric? And yes, right when it drives off the lot, the electric car has a little bit higher amount of carbon emissions because of its manufacture and its battery. It's really the battery where it is. It's about 15% more for a standard car. But what happens is, after about 6,000 miles of driving that electric car, because you're driving it based on electricity, not based out of filling it with CO2 or with gasoline that then burned and turned into carbon dioxide, it reaches parity after about 6,000 miles. And then every mile after that, it's better than a gasoline car. The other thing is, if you are running that car off of electricity from solar panels or from wind or from hydroelectric, if you're driving it here in Seattle, where 99% of our electricity is carbon neutral, zero carbon, because we've got a mix of hydroelectric and wind and solar, then it's zero. It's only the blue and the red that you have to overcome. Okay. And then depending on where you live and your fuel mix for your state, in our state we are about 10% coal and about 8% natural gas. Those are the fossil fuels that make up the most of ours. So that gives us about 94 miles per gallon equivalents for an electric car if you drive it in the Northwest region. If you drive it in Seattle, that mile per gallon is much, much higher because we have no carbon, right? About 1% carbon to our electricity, right? So when we're burning, turning on our lights and stuff, it's 99% carbon zero, or zero carbon. If you live in other parts of the US, you can see 35 miles per gallon is the equivalence for an electric. So you might be better off driving a Prius that is a hybrid gas car. But those are moving quickly. More and more states are shutting down their coal plants, building solar farms and wind farms. So this is switching up pretty quick. And then individual and collective actions. Both of these are needed. There's a big debate in the climate world right now around whether people should do individual actions. And absolutely, our individual actions, if we can afford to do them, they shift culture. They tell our friends and our family and our businesses and our government what we care about. So if you can afford to drive an electric car rather than a gas car, if you can afford to ride your bike, that's my son, then do it, because that sends a signal to those around you. If you can afford to put solar panels on your home, but not everyone can, right? The individual actions are not what is going to ultimately address this climate crisis that we're in. It's going to take the collective actions. It's going to take Metro moving to electric buses. China is so far ahead of us on this. 500,000 of the buses in China are electric. nearly half of their buses. Here we've got maybe 10,000 that are electric. More and more are coming online, but right now there's other countries that are so far ahead of us. Electric cars in Norway, 2025, you won't be able to buy a gas car in Norway. They're phasing out the sale of gas cars. Over 60% of the cars sold in Norway last year were electric. So the rest of the world is moving forward on this very quickly. We've got some catching up to do. And so, those individual actions that we can make, they will shift culture for the collective action that's ultimately needed to address this. And then this gives me hope. On the left is 1900, and on the right, I don't know why the numbers disappeared, is 1913. And this is New York City, Fifth Avenue. And you'll notice on the left, there's no cars. The red circle is the one car in 1900. And within 13 years, just over a decade, the entire street, there's no more horses. It's all cars. We can make shifts in culture that we need to when we want to. And so this gives me hope that we can make that shift to reduce the carbon emissions, to go to the electrification that we truly need in our power, in our cars, in our lives. So, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Heather. So Heather gave us a little background on the science, where we stand right now. We're going to bring up our next speaker who's going to talk a little bit about policy, what's going on right now down in Olympia and elsewhere. So our next speaker is Kelly Hall. She's a senior policy manager at Climate Solutions, an organization with the mission of accelerating clean energy solutions to the climate crisis. She helps develop, analyze, advocate for, and implement clean energy policies for a rapid and equitable transition to clean energy in the Northwest. Prior to Climate Solutions, Kelly began her career as a probation officer. You weren't my oh, wait a second, never mind. But she made a career shift after examining the ethics of climate change and its intersection with other social issues for which she cares deeply. She gained her first experience in renewable energy policy and utility regulation as the Washington policy manager at Renewable Northwest before transitioning to her current role at Climate Solutions in 2016. Let's give it up for Kelly Hall.
Thank you, Sean. As Sean said, my name is Kelly Hall. I am a policy manager at Climate Solutions. And for those of you who don't know much about us, we're an organization based here in Washington and Oregon. All right, is that better? All right, so for those of you who don't know Climate Solutions, we're an organization based here in Washington and Oregon and really focus on accelerating solutions to the climate crisis. So I'm on our policy team. I do a lot of the policy work around renewable electricity, clean transportation options, doing more work on clean buildings, the whole gamut of things that touch climate policy. And so tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about clean fuels, which is a big policy that we're working on this session. So Heather did a really good job at talking a little bit about the science, and I wanted to start off with just what's happened since 1990 and where we need to go. So in 1990, our emissions were just above 80 million metric tons. They have since gone up, and if you look over all the way to the right, that's where we need to go. So I start with this slide just to show folks the scale of action that is needed over the next 3 decades, because we have a significant amount of work to do and haven't done really anything except further damage the climate since 1990. So if we do nothing, this is what will happen. We'll reduce some emissions, and just so folks know, this does not include the 100% clean electricity bill that passed last year. This analysis was done before that. But as you can see, especially if we're just looking at transportation, which are the green and blue bars, not a whole lot's going to happen. We'll get some more efficiency in our vehicles, they'll get a little bit cleaner, but there's not a lot that's going to happen. So if we actually want to reduce emissions, this is the scale of what actually needs to be done. So you can see every single sector needs to be reducing. In the green and blue bars, which are gasoline and diesel, those reductions need to be about 96% in diesel and about 94% in gasoline. So we don't have a lot of options but to start reducing now and to keep reducing until we get to almost an entirely clean transportation sector. So before I start talking a little bit about clean fuels, I'm going to hold this with my right hand, so I just hold it right here in my mouth. I'm going to talk just a little bit about our vision for transportation. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about the fuel side of things, but I definitely want to acknowledge, and there are a lot of folks here in the room that have done a lot of work on other components of the transportation sector. So the way that Climate Solutions thinks about transportation policy is that we need to be working on transit and different ways of getting around, increased bike and pedestrian infrastructure. All of that is critically important. And then we also need to make sure that whatever vehicles remain on the road, they are fueled with clean fuels and electricity, and making sure that we are actually cleaning up that sector. So I don't want to dismiss the first, but just wanted to acknowledge that I'm only going to be talking to you tonight about the Clean Fuel Standard, which just addresses the fuel side of things. So it gets a little bit wonky, but I do want to explain what the policy is. First of all, on the left, you'll see here the entire West Coast, and Washington is in red, meaning that we're the only state on the West Coast that does not have a clean fuel standard. So BC, Oregon, California, they are all benefiting from cleaner transportation options, and Washington is stuck without a clean fuel standard. We are producing some clean fuels here, and we're sending them down to other states. So we're not reaping any of the health benefits, anything like that, because we still don't have a clean fuel standard. So basically, the way that the policy works, it's a little bit hard to see, but this is a trajectory of the reductions that are required by the standard. So we start with what's called the carbon intensity of our fuels, which is right at 100 grams per megajoule. Don't worry about the metrics, but just know that this is basically where gasoline and diesel are starting, and they need to get a 20% reduction by 2035. If you are a fuel that is above that line, basically gasoline and diesel, you're going to be in deficit and need to somehow figure out how to reduce your emissions. If you're a fuel that's below that line, like electricity is very clean, or there are some biofuels depending on how they're produced, you're going to generate credits that you'll help then the oil industry be able to comply. One thing I wanted to note about this is just that all fuels, we're not basing them on just the tailpipe emissions, but it takes into account the entire life cycle emissions of a fuel. So we get a lot of questions around biofuels. Are they all created equally? The answer is absolutely not. So it takes into account the extraction of the fuel, the transportation of the fuel, the refining of the fuel. If there are any land use changes, the fuel is penalized for that. But it takes into account the entire life cycle analysis of a fuel. So basically, again, if those fuels that are above that line, the way that they can comply, there are a couple of different ways. One, they can, this goes into a mathematical example if folks who like numbers, but basically a refinery can improve the efficiency of their operations, so they can get cleaner, whether it's making, they could add solar to their operations to clean up their electricity. They could make all of their processes more efficient. Anything to reduce the carbon in that entire life cycle analysis of the fuel. The second thing they could do is blend in biofuels. So some biofuels blend in with petroleum and can make that fuel marginally cleaner. So again, it depends what that biofuel is, but you can blend it in and make the fuel cleaner. The vast majority of our compliance would come through purchasing credits from another entity that produces clean fuels. For example, electricity is a clean fuel. I think this policy is often a misnomer because people think clean fuels, we're talking about liquid fuels only. Electricity is probably the primary way that Washington will comply with the clean fuel standard. You can't blend in electricity to petroleum, and so that's where the credit generation happens. So a utility would generate electricity for a charging station. A charging station would then generate credits. We'd get more EVs on the road, more electricity as a fuel, and the oil industry would have to purchase that from the utility in order to comply. So it allows some flexibility in how the petroleum industry can comply without requiring that they just blend in cleaner fuels. It allows those other fuels to participate that I assume a lot of people in this room would really like to see, which is electricity. So what can we expect to see? I already started to talk a little bit about this, but the primary thing we would expect to see with this policy is more electric cars, trucks, and buses. In California, they've had this program going for a number of years now, and utilities are offering rebates to customers for, like you and me, for EVs. Transit agencies are also generating a lot of credits. So if a transit agency were to invest in an electric bus, such as King County, which is doing so, in California, they're generating about $10,000 per year per bus. So that really helps the transit agency make the decision, no, I don't really want to keep relying on diesel. I think we should go electric instead. It helps to make an electric bus pencil out and reduce those operating costs. And in California in 2016, they increased they generated about $92 million just to be spending then in electrification projects. And again, that's not just passenger vehicles, but buses, heavy duty trucks, all kinds of things that need to be electrified. We'll also see more low carbon, sustainably produced biofuels. So right here in the state, we make a lot of fuels, or at least have the capacity to make a lot of fuels, like renewable natural gas from our dairy farms or from wastewater treatment facilities. There's a really interesting facility over on Vashon Island called Impact Bioenergy, and they take waste from a tofu farm and turn it into a transportation fuel and fertilizer. So that closed loop economy that they can really help generate, it can help make their business model better and stimulate some investment in businesses like that. And the last thing we're likely to see is that higher efficiency refining. So I think all of us would not like to see ultimately us relying on petroleum, but here over the next 30 years, as we transition off of petroleum, we do need to make sure that they're using the most efficient processes possible. This graph just is to demonstrate the yellow chunk there in the middle is our compliance pathways. The yellow chunk is electrification. So just to demonstrate that we do assume the vast majority of our compliance would be through electrification. So what can we expect from this? Heather talked a lot about the health impacts of relying on petroleum. This is huge. So our biggest partners in pushing a clean fuel standard are the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, the Washington State Medical Association, the American Lung Association, family physicians. This is a top priority because this is half of our carbon pollution, but also half of our air pollution. And this is the number one policy to reduce those emissions immediately. In California, they are expecting by 2030 over $8 billion in avoided healthcare costs. That's from avoided trips to the emergency room, et cetera. And I just read a really interesting study in 1996 when they were preparing for the Olympics. They shut down a few streets in the downtown corridor for 4 weeks. And after 4 weeks, they saw a 42% reduction in childhood asthma attacks. 42% in just 4 weeks, which just shows you how much of our asthma and our healthcare costs are directly related to the fossil fuel industry. We can also expect a healthier climate. In California, they've already reduced 38 million tons of climate pollution. So again, this policy would immediately start transitioning us to cleaner fuels and electricity. And then a healthier economy. We can make all of these fuels here. We have an incredibly clean grid that's getting cleaner and cleaner. We can use our food waste. We can use our dairy waste. We have all the fuels here that we need. There's no need to be importing fuels from outside of Washington state. Additionally, it can also save us money. A consumer union report just showed that a result of California's policies can save folks between $1,200 and $1,500 a year because we're relying on more efficient vehicles, because electricity is cheaper, because we're not relying on the monopoly of the oil industry. So it's not just that we can create jobs, that we can actually save money as we transition to cleaner fuels as well. One of the last things I'll say is just these are 3 keys to kind of how a clean fuel standard works. It's technology neutral, so it doesn't decide which fuel pathway. We have 30 years to figure that out, but it does create that life cycle analysis score of every single fuel. It's also flexible. Same thing. It doesn't determine that pathway, so entities have a variety of different ways to comply in the most cost-effective way, but ensures that we are complying and getting on that transition to cleaner fuels. And lastly, because of that flexibility, it does keep costs low. It does choose the most cost-effective way to transition to clean fuels. All right, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. That was great. It's nice to learn about clean fuel standards. Before I introduce our final speaker and our 3rd panelist tonight, I just want to make one little plug. As I told you at the outset, Cascadia Climate Action puts these events on. It's all about climate action. First action I want you to take is I want you to start thinking about questions for our panelists during the Q&A. Everyone should have 3x5 cards at their tables. Look for your 3x5 cards. You should find yourself a pencil or a pen. Start thinking about some questions that you can ask our panelists, because really the Q&A is going to be driven by you. If you have questions about the science, if you have questions about the policy, if you have some questions about action and organizing, Ben can answer those for you too. So start writing those questions down, because we'll ask for those 3x5 cards as soon as we start the Q&A in just a few moments. All right, so I do want to introduce our 3rd and final speaker, Ben Selesky. Ben has been a climate change and clean energy organizer since 2014. He led campus fossil fuel divestment campaigns, spent 2 years as the field manager for Yes on I-732, and has been working to mobilize Audubon's climate advocates since 2017. Ben believes that everyone can play a valuable role in transitioning our society to clean energy future. He is determined to bring this message to as many different spaces, groups, and demographics as a way to build the political will necessary for achieving our climate goals, but enjoys playing music and discovering hidden beaches around Olympia where he lives. And now, welcome up front, Ben Selesky.
Thank you very much. All right, I've been told I have to breeze through this, so I'm going to tell you what it's all going to take to pass a clean fuel standard, and I'm going to show you as well. So HB 1110 is, here we go. Whoop, how do you, right, there we go. So HB 1110 is a live bill. It's a low carbon fuel standard, a clean fuel standard, and it's currently in the legislature right now, moving through it. A couple weeks ago, it passed the House, and it is now sitting in the Senate Energy, Environment, and Technology Committee. So it's nearly halfway through this process. And keep in mind, so I am a field organizer for the Audubon Society, right? We're working on this because climate change is the #1 threat to birds. 2/3 of all North American bird species are at risk of extinction if we don't reduce our emissions. And we can still save the majority of them if we act now and act drastically to reduce our emissions. The biggest single source of our emissions come from transportation. That's why transportation is harmful to birds, it's harmful to people, and it's going to take a whole bunch of people to pass this policy. Because this is more than just a bill, this is a campaign, meaning that it's going to take all of you in specific key regions to build the political will and community support necessary to pass this. So I just want to make sure that we are trying to kind of animate our actions with a vision of a future society, right? It's not just one bill or one solution. You'll notice we're talking about a clean fuel standard today, but all around these tables surrounding you are all sorts of amazing groups working on amazing climate solutions, and we all need to be able to state what our sort of singular vision is, right? And what is that? 100% clean energy across all sectors. And so the way that we win is when we broaden our support, broaden our coalition, get people who would not otherwise show up to an event like this to show up to the right places at the right times. So, I don't know if you can see this, but essentially I want you to think about all of your advocacy actions through this filter, right? We have lone wolf tactics, we have mobilizer, and we have an organizer. You just had some climate science, we're gonna do some social science now. So, when you're a lone wolf, you are someone who's just taking an individual action by yourself. You're calling your senator, sending in a public comment, sending your legislator an email. Now, when you are a mobilizer, that's even more effective. That's organizing everybody in this room. That's sending an email to all the people on your sort of neighborhood climate activism list. Basically getting all the other people that you know care deeply about this issue, but just couldn't make it out here tonight. How many other people do you know that care about this issue that just couldn't make it out here tonight? It's really easy stuff, and it's a lot of what other environmental organizations do, right? We send out a big email alert to our list. An organizer is how we win, is how when we reach out to new demographics and other sort of non-traditional allies to show up in support of the policies that we want, right? So that's getting businesses to sign our letter of support, which is one sort of tactic that we have. I'll tell you about that in a second. Reaching out to parent-teacher associations, doing outreach to student groups, church groups, civic groups, religious groups, public health groups, all sorts of other organizations and people that, you know, would be qualified as like maybe concerned, but not necessarily mobilized yet to take action. So we have various tools that we have right here for building support for a clean fuel standard, and this is obviously applicable to many different kinds of climate campaigns, not just clean fuels. But we have a community network map sheet. It's just a sheet that we have, and my colleague Adam on our Audubon table over there has a few of those as well as Sarah and Morgan from WEC over there. It's basically just a way to map down your personal network and connections. So, for example, if you are a small business owner, if you know a small business owner, if there are local businesses that you are a frequent patron of, if you have a personal relationship with a local elected official, people who would sort of perk up the ears of certain legislators, right? So if we're trying to figure out how we win a campaign, and like, what is the definition of a campaign? Basically getting somebody to do something that they would not have otherwise done themselves. And so that takes a combination of both pressure and persuasion. And we influence people when we get non-traditional people that would show up to an event to advocate for our same solutions, beyond just climate activists. And so it's a great way to do peer-to-peer organizing, brainstorm your own personal networks, write down who you know. Anyway, sending in letters to the editors and op-eds is a very powerful method. We have a business sign-on letter that I referenced earlier. This is what we've been doing last session when we passed 100% clean electricity, and it's what we're doing now. We are essentially going to small local businesses in some of our target regions in Tacoma and Snohomish County and East King County, places where we need to build up the community public will for this. We're going to small local businesses and having them sign on a letter of support, from which we are then using to encourage them to take further action. And I'll tell you about more of that in a second. We also have a similar sign-on support letter directed at local elected leaders, so city council members, county council members. And we have like a canvassing script for businesses as well. I also want to give a shout out to my old colleague Chris Connolly back there, who got a lot of support from the small local businesses during our 100% clean electrification campaign. And this is just goes to show that we got so many local businesses to sign on that we actually need your help to reach back out to them and get them to sign on to this clean fuel standard letter and basically move them up the ladder of engagement in various ways. We have yard signs, and we have stickers, we have window clings. We have to increase the volume and visibility of a clean fuel standard. This is not just a bill, this is a campaign. So, here's just some examples of what we're doing. It's kind of blurry, but we have small business owners all across some of our key legislative districts, all taking a picture with a sign saying, I support 100% clean energy in Washington. This is after they signed the letter of support, and taking a picture with them is just a wonderful way to sort of boost up and visualize their support, as well as sending in those photos to some of our most important legislators and say, look, it's more than just climate activists that support these issues. Cool. So, like I said, we are doing these sign-on letters for small businesses is a huge way that we're getting support from really key constituents that would really perk up the ears of legislators. I remember during the 100% clean electrification bill, we had a legislator up in the peninsula who said, "I'm not a scientist, I'm not an expert, I am voting for this bill because small local businesses in my district are telling me that they want this." And just like that, they passed it. So yes, we have sign-on letters over there. We have these little packets on that table over there and that table over there. So if you know local businesses or you are a small local business owner and you think that they would be interested in signing our letter of support or taking a photo with the Clean Fuel sign, submitting an op-ed or an LTE themselves as a small business owner, calling their senator, testifying at the hearings for clean fuels, which we think might be this week, could be next week, or attending a town hall, which I'll show you in a second, or meeting with their senator in Olympia, reaching out to other businesses, owners, or business associations, right? And so this is all about thinking like, how many small businesses or any kind of other community group are you a part of right now that would be interested in joining this and signing on and making their concerns known and their voice heard? Cool, so now I'm just going to kind of show you examples of everything I'm saying, just to let you know that this is not just a theoretical exercise. We are out there doing this work, and we can't succeed without your help. So here's myself and one other organizer getting signatures in the 29th Legislative District in Tacoma. We got businesses signing on to our letter of support that day, nail salons, auto repair shops, corner stores, restaurants, coffee shops, all sorts of businesses. Over here on this side is our Youth Climate Lobby Day that we did last year. These are students writing letters to their legislators, right? So these are two different examples of getting in new people into this movement, into this campaign that are just outside beyond the usual groups of people that would show up for these types of things. These are two local business owners in the 5th Legislative District, very important district. These were taken a couple days ago by a couple volunteers in that district. They're like, "Oh yeah, give me the volunteer business outreach packet. I'll reach out to some small business owners that I know." And so this is just another example of it. Here are 3 op-eds or letters to the editor, 2 of them written by small business owners, 1 of them written by a doctor. Once again, drafting and submitting a letter to the editor or op-ed and identifying yourself as a small business owner or a doctor using messaging around the importance of the small business communities to support these policies or the public health benefits is a huge, huge, huge advantage for us. In addition, we did some public forums in some of our most strategic legislative districts here in Issaquah, one in Snohomish. We worked in parallel with a campaign for a clean fuel standard through the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, and building up support in the community is really effective when you do public forums there, kind of like what we're doing now. So if anyone is interested in hosting or putting on a public forum in your community, let me know. Here's a group of high school kids meeting with the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, Steve Hobbs, very, very important person who has a huge opportunity to move this bill forward, and we have to encourage him to do so. These are incredible high school students from his district that met with him, and it was a really, really great meeting, and it was an opportunity for him to meet with constituents that he doesn't often get to meet with. Here is now House Speaker Lorie Jenkins at a bird walk with the Tahoma Audubon Society. This is just one example of how you kind of build a strong relationship with either city council members or legislators or anyone, so that when the time comes, like to ask them for like support on an issue, there's an already pre-existing relationship there. And here is more public testimony on the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. Once again, building up the sort of vocal support in the community for clean fuels and clean transportation is extremely important, and there are many different ways that we are doing that. All right, so here in Seattle, we are lucky enough to have a whole bunch of great supportive senators. Here's the thing though. In a short legislative session, 60 days is all we have here. Our biggest obstacle to passing this is not outright opposition, it's just lack of prioritization. We need to make sure that the senators who are supportive of this, and we have to thank them for their support, we have to encourage them to be a champion and a leader for it. So we have their phone numbers right here and a lovely script. Make sure to thank them for their support and encourage them to have their other Senate colleagues move this bill forward as a priority. We cannot let go of the urgency of this. Call them now! All right, last couple slides. We have upcoming town halls. I try to get the ones that were either in Seattle or around Seattle. Most of these are happening this weekend. And so it's really important that a lot of these senators make sure that they hear the clean fuel standard as a priority. Not just something to support when it comes up, but we need to move this forward actively. Here's some more. I can go back on any of these slides too. All right, fantastic. Thanks for your time.
All right, thank you very much, Ben. Thank you for that. Lots of great ways that everyone can get involved. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to ask our three speakers to come up front and take seats here on our stools. If you've had a second to write out a question for any one of our three speakers, if you have that question written out, just wave it in the air, and one of our volunteers will come by and grab it and bring it up front. I'll go ahead and have our speakers, Heather, Kelly, Ben, come on up. Take a seat, will you? And if you have questions, please pass those to the volunteers. Everybody gets their own microphone so we don't fight over them. Oh, any questions again? Fantastic. Just one more plug for all of our great tabling groups around the room. Please, before you leave tonight, make sure you stop by one of these folks, one of these fine groups here, and learn a little bit more about what you can do to combat climate change. So let's go ahead and get started with our Q&A right now. I'll start with a question for Kelly about the clean fuel standards. I think that's the question that people come up with all the time. It's like, how much is it going to cost us? So what is the cost of implementing a clean fuel standard for us?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I think I'm going to answer that in a couple of different ways. The first thing to keep in mind is how much is it costing us to not have a clean fuel standard? I mentioned this, but there was a recent Consumers Union report that said the clean fuel standard and other transportation policies in California actually save customers about $1,200 to $1,500 per year. And that's because vehicles are more efficient, because electricity is cheaper, because there's more competition in the market, so the oil industry doesn't have a monopoly over us. And so the question really is that we get the question a lot, yeah, but what about at the pump? How much is this going to cost me at the pump? And I just think that's the wrong question to be asking. Here in Washington, another interesting report is that 5 out of the top 10 most profitable oil industry markets are right here in our state. In Seattle, the oil industry rings in about 80 cents per gallon in pure profit, all profit. Back where I'm from the Midwest, profit margins are closer to like 5 or 6 cents per gallon. And the oil industry does that because they can, because there's no competition here. So they can charge us whatever they want. You can drive around and look at different gas stations. Gas stations 2-3 blocks away will have a 50-cent differential in gas prices. It's because they set the price based on the global market, based on what they want to charge us. And so I think there are a lot of other things I could go into around what it is really costing us to not have it. But the truth of the matter is we can actually save money as we transition to cleaner fuels and get off the monopoly that we're currently stuck in right now.
Okay, thank you. This is a great question because it reminds me of one of my elementary school math problems. So for the same 5-mile trip, how much CO2 do you emit driving an average new car compared to riding a King County Metro bus? Now I know that's very specific, but I guess what it gets to is like this idea of trade-offs and the costs of trips, transportation costs. So for any length of trip, there must be trade-offs. Maybe Heather, you can get to this in terms of, say, for instance, riding a bus or driving a car or flying a plane.
The numbers I don't have in my head, but when you're on a bus with many more people, the emissions are going to be much lower.
Per capita.
Per person, yeah. The bus itself is emitting more carbon dioxide, and if it's diesel, which most of our buses are, they're also emitting those particulates, but it's averaged over a busload of people. When you're in a car, it's just one person. And so riding the bus is going to be much more efficient. And as we move to electric buses, which King County Metro is moving toward, or if you drive the light rail, that's all electric. So we are moving toward that faster and faster. Air travel is the most carbon intensive in terms of its emissions. It is, if you're going to go on a long range trip, let's say that you're going from here to Portland or here to Los Angeles, taking a plane is going to emit the most carbon of any of your choices. Taking an electric car is going to be the least. My family just took an electric car road trip down to California last summer. And so we really think hard whether we're going to fly today. We used to take flights for our vacations. We don't anymore. Every once in a while I will for work. But an electric car is number one. After that, a train. And then the worst is flying.
All right, great. Thank you for that. And by the way, folks, I should have mentioned this earlier. If you had any trouble seeing the slides previously, we are making a recording of this. We'll be putting it up on our YouTube channel like we do for all of our Climate Science on Tap events. And so you can view that later on. We'll make sure the link gets out to everybody in the audience. So Ben, I do have a question for you as well. So you showed us a lot of different ways that folks can engage. For the folks here in this audience, maybe folks who are new to getting active around the issue of climate change, what's one thing that they can do, quick and easy, it's going to give them the most bang for their buck?
If you want to do something quick, call up your senator and tell them to be a climate champion and encourage their colleagues in the Senate to move HB 1110 forward.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes, very good. Thank you very much. But Heather wants to also say something.
Yes, I second that. Call your senators, your legislators. Something that as a educator that I really encourage people to do is to talk about it. Just like you don't need to be a doctor to tell somebody to stop smoking around a baby, you have the information to be able to talk about climate. You know more than probably most people. Go out and talk about it. And that could be so much as talking about electric cars, talking about remodeling your home and whether you're going to, how you're going to heat it. You're going to get a heat pump, or you're going to, when you have to replace your stove, are you going to put an induction in, right? Conversations, stories. So connect with each other.
Great. Thank you so much. So this one's for Kelly. Kelly, assuming that the oil industry does not like this, right? Would you say that's a fair thing to say?
It's their least favorite policy.
This is their least favorite thing, probably in the world. So what are their objections, and why are they, well, I can't use this word, but why are they full of crap?
Well, their only objections are cost, right? That's at least what publicly they're saying. This is going to cost us too much. We can't afford it. We have to remain on oil. And why is it that word you can't say? Because of what I just told you. They don't want to increase competition. They have a monopoly on our market. Anyone that has a monopoly doesn't want to increase competition. And so this is their absolute least favorite policy. I think many of you probably know BP is engaging and some of the oil industry is engaging and now promoting cap and trade or carbon tax, which we can talk about that, and there are good and bad things about those policies, but the point is they are trying to shift away from a clean fuel standard because this directly impacts their bottom line.
All right, that's good to know. Yes, thank you. All right, maybe this one's for Ben. So you mentioned small business owners. In this particular case, how do you think small business owners personally relate to this issue of the cleaner fuel standards? Why is this important to them? Why would they want to take a stand on this issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll go, and then if anyone else wants to add anything. I mean, it probably depends on what kind of business they are, but if many of the businesses that we talk to, so for example, in South Tacoma, a lot of these businesses are right by a main road, and they get the brunt of all sorts of fumes and particulate emissions, and it's just not really a great place to walk around. It's not really a great place to have a vibrant community. And so I think just to sort of make the experience of the communities where these small businesses reside more, I guess, humane and healthy, that's one incentive. And I think it would generally reduce costs for a lot of businesses as well. Like the less oil and gas they have to use, the cheaper it is. And yeah, I don't know, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember that a lot of business owners are people like you and me, and they care about the climate as well. And more businesses every day have sustainability goals, and getting some of these policies in place will help them achieve those goals. Again, without any competition and having any choices, it's really hard for a business to make the right decision as well. But if we increase that choice, increase the opportunity for clean fuels and electricity, businesses support that, and it helps them meet their goals as well.
All right.
And I'll just add real quickly, like most people care about this issue, but they just need to be presented with a solution that they uniquely can affect. Business owners have a unique opportunity to affect this policy, and they need to be reminded of that.
Good point. Thank you. All right, Heather, this one I think is a good one for you, but maybe the rest of you can chime in on it as well. For those of us driving non-electric cars, which I'm sure is still quite a few of us, is there a certain type of fuel that we should be looking for purchasing at the pump right now? Is there something out there right now? Is there a certain, should we be going to some particular company?
In terms of the different gas stations, they're all gasoline, or diesel. If you do drive a diesel car, you have the choice of biodiesel. So before I had an electric car, I drove a diesel car and I ran it on biodiesel to reduce its carbon emissions. Even though the air pollution is still going to be similar to that of a diesel car. It's somewhat lower, but it still has NOx and ozone and those others. But there's not a lot of choice, right? If you're running your car on gasoline, for every gallon of gas that you burn, 19 pounds of carbon dioxide is going into the atmosphere, right? For a 5-pound gallon of gas, 19 pounds of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So over the year, it equals the weight of the car in emissions of carbon dioxide. It's a lot. So, and there's not much that we can do. We can drive more efficient cars until the electric cars come down in price. In Norway and in the Netherlands, there's price parity, right? Over 60% of the cars in Norway last year were electric, right? They have the incentives there to do that, and the prices here are coming down. They expect parity by about 2021 or 2022.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so maybe this one's for you, Kelly. How much can we expect carbon emissions to be reduced if we adopt these clean fuel standards? I mean, based on what's been done in other states, I suppose.
Sure. So a 20% reduction would equate to roughly 6 million ton reduction by 2035. I will admit that is not for me the driving factor. The driving factor is that I think it'll reduce emissions a lot more than 6 million tons. By the time 2035 hits, if we have a clean fuel standard and have really spurred a competitive market, as Heather just said, EVs are going to be cost effective here in the early 2020s. We need markets to create the demand for these fuels. But I think when a clean fuel standard is fully implemented, EVs will be the choice. Electric buses it'll just be automatic. And so I think that at an absolute minimum, 6 million tons by 2035, but I think really this will help us create a business as usual situation where EVs and clean fuels are just automatic.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this one actually I think is a good question for Heather and Kelly together. Maybe not at the same time. Take turns. So you sort of alluded to the issue of natural gas and leakage before. So for the clean fuels bill, will that leakage rate of natural gas be determined? Is that calculated as part of the carbon emissions? Will that be part of the life cycle analysis? And really, Heather, what percentage of that? I mean, what is the leakage rate? I mean, what can we expect that to be?
The leakage rate for methane, which is CH4, that's the principal component of natural gas, varies depending on where it's being extracted. There's numbers for some extraction where it's 19%, and then there's some where it's 0.9. The threshold is around 2.7%. So if the leak rate is over about 2.7%, that's out of Cornell, Robert Howarth's lab, then it's as bad as coal. Right now, his estimates and the estimates that are coming out over the past year or two are that we're over that threshold for the leakage nationwide. And this is based on isotopic signatures in the atmosphere, comparisons with other non-methane hydrocarbons, things like that. So it's likely that natural gas is not the cleaner option that we thought it was. Even as a graduate student, when I was a postdoc, I worked with methane emissions, and we thought that they were cleaner. And we're finding out they're likely not anymore.
And I can just say that fossil natural gas would very likely not have a carbon intensity low enough to even score for this program. So it wouldn't be considered a clean fuel. The carbon intensity is it's too high to even score. So the score of these fuels would be on the entire life cycle analysis, which would include the extraction and everything in between, but fossil gas would not be a part of this program, very likely.
All right, thank you so much. Y'all, I'm realizing what time it is, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We still have a lot of questions to get through. I'm afraid we won't have time for those right now. What we will do is we will take those questions, we'll type them up, and we'll submit them to our panelists, and hopefully those folks will be kind enough to answer those questions, and we'll make sure that they get distributed through our newsletter and other offerings. Or, if you'd like, after this event concludes, you can ask your questions directly of the panelists. They're very approachable people. I've talked to them, and they've been very nice about it. So I would really strongly encourage you to talk to them directly. But first, let's go ahead and give them a big round of applause for all of their work here. Very, very good.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so as I mentioned beforehand, we here at Cascadia Climate Action, we really want you to take some action on behalf of the climate. There are lots of great tablers around. Before you leave tonight, I want you to go and talk to somebody. You can go over and talk to the Cascadia Climate Action table and complete a postcard. And you can certainly visit the Cascadia Climate Action website to learn about a lot of different events that are happening in our area. You'll also get information about past Climate Science on Tap events. We have a YouTube channel, lots of great videos covering a range of topics from geoengineering to agriculture, really across the spectrum. So please check them out and please visit our tables. Also, please, as I said, talk to the tables around. We have Audubon, Washington. By the way, these QR codes will take you right to their websites. So Audubon, Washington over there. Bike Works over here in the corner. You go see those guys. The Citizens Climate Lobby, they're over here. Please go see them. Climate Solutions. Where is Climate Solutions? They're over there. Feed First, they're over there in the corner. The Mass Coalition, specifically Seattle Subway, they're right there. And Seattle Electric Vehicle Association, they're over there as well. Washington Environmental Council, where you at? Right there. They are very enthusiastic. You should definitely go see them. And the Western Washington Clean Cities Coalition, they're over there. And like I said, they have great coasters. And of course, Cascadia Climate Action. Again, I just want to give a special thank you to our panelists, Heather Price, Kelly Hall, Ben Selesky. Let's give it up for them one more time. And of course, the Cascadia Climate Action volunteers. Raise your hand, volunteers. And please, 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 one big loud round of applause for Optimism Brewing. They allow us to come here all the time, free of charge. Tip them well. Okay, with that, I will just say y'all have a great evening, good night. Transport yourselves home safely and in a low carbon way. But if you have questions for our panelists, please come up and talk to them. All right, thank you very much.